Hello and welcome to the Modern Divorce Podcast. This is Billy Tarasio, and I'm here with a longtime friend of mine. I'm so excited to have Rachel Guernsey. Did I say it correctly?
You did, yep.
Okay, fabulous, fabulous. On with me. And Rachel, tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed clinical professional counselor. A couple of fancy titles that basically mean I'm a counselor. I work with kids and families. I have a long experience of working specifically with grief and loss, as well as anxiety and depression. Have a bunch of different trainings to go along with all those things, a bunch of letters that can get attached to my name. But the most important part is just that I work with kids and families and work with trying to help them kind of navigate just life as it is.
I am so happy that you're here because I was talking with a friend of mine who's a doctor, and she said that she has never prescribed antidepressants for kids to the same extent that she is seeing right now, and that kids in general are in crisis and are really feeling the effects of isolation, of lack of exercise, of panic and anxiety that they see around them. And then, of course, there's the fact that I work with families that are going through divorce all the time, which adds more complexity. So I really wanted to get your input on what parents can do to help their children with stress.
Yeah. So, and that's a really important aspect to really look at because there are so many components in our lives that can cause stress. Take away the pandemic, take away divorce, right? Just if this is a normal life, day to day, in and out, there's stress in
Mhm.
our lives. Parents, even if they are not getting divorced, have conflict. Conflict can be healthy, but conflict isn't always healthy. Not getting along with friends, having body issues, having health problems. There's lots of different aspects of our lives that can create stress for us. But a big component that we have to look at too with kids is that they don't just get stressed from their own environment, from what they experience, they feed off of their parents and
Mhm.
their caregivers' stress. So
Mhm.
even if, like, going into a divorce situation, right? Even if the parents are not doing some of those big, what we would maybe term as no-nos in a divorce, right? Even if they're not doing those things, the kids are still going to be getting that stress because they feel it from the parents.
Yeah.
As much self-care as the parents can do during this,
Mhm.
that's going to play a huge role in helping the kids and support the kids where they're at.
Mhm. 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 Okay, so I really want to know, let's take this age by age. If we've got children that are, let's say, under the age of 5, how do we recognize what does stress and anxiety to the point where we should be concerned and be paying attention? What does that look like in kids that are under 5?
So the first thing I want to just say across the board, the biggest thing to help with stress and anxiety or any kind of struggle with your children is just to recognize it first. So I like that that's where we're going, right? The first key in being able to make any changes is to recognize that change even needs to happen.
Mhm.
And so stress with kids, it definitely is very age dependent.
Mhm.
And that a big piece of that's going to be because of where they're at developmentally. So when you're looking at the 0 to 5, kind of that newborn, even all the way up to toddler, up to the way they're getting into the school age, really what you're going to find is that those kids are in a very um, concrete thinking, right? So what I see is what is. So dad's not here, mom's not here, that means they're gone.
Oh,
Like they might
yeah.
not be coming back. They're
Yeah.
just not here. They don't really understand future thinking. They don't
Mhm.
understand the abstracts, like, oh, they still love you, but they're not here. They don't really understand that. They just know that I want them now and they're not here now.
Mhm.
Right. And so the biggest thing with kids to look out for is you're going to see some of that irritability, kind of
Mhm.
the crankiness, right? Kind of those typical things that you see with kids that are
Mhm.
that age, the whining, the clinginess, those types of things. But it's going to be on an even bigger scale than you would maybe normally see when they're not under those additional stresses, right? So like I said, the clinginess is a big one. Sometimes you might see some regression. That's
Mhm.
a big component once you get to kind of that toddler stage. So
Mhm.
maybe you have a kiddo who's been starting to sleep through the night. Well, now all of a sudden you have this change that happens, and now you notice, well, they were kind of sleeping through the night, but now they're waking up a lot. Or they were able to sleep in their own bed, and now they want to sleep only in mom or dad's bed. Um, Potty training is a big one too, right? Like, oh, they were pretty much potty trained, and now they started having accidents. I mean, that can actually creep into some of the little bit older school-aged kids, but that's more of a big element that you're going to see with those younger kids.
Okay. And so if we see our children experiencing that, what steps should we take as parents to support them?
So with that, and this is going to be kind of with all the different developmental stages. Again, the first one is just kind of recognizing it. So you need to know your kids, right?
Mhm.
You need to know them so that you know, is there something different, first of all?
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you have been the parent that maybe wasn't as hands-on before, like if you were if one parent tended to be more of the hands-on caring for the child day in, day out with the bottles and diapers and things like that, you really have to get in there and know your child. Because if
Mhm.
you don't, you're not going to recognize those things, right? And that's the first step, is recognizing it. So you really need to get to know your child first and foremost.
Mhm.
Second step is going to be saying, hey, there's something coming up. If there is, if the divorce, if we're talking on a divorce state, right, where you have a parent here and a parent there, if you can have that communication, having that open communication with the other parent is going to be huge. It's going to be a huge element in finding out, maybe is it happening at that other house? Is it only happening at your house? Was it happening before and you just didn't recognize it? Like, where are we at in this development of this thing that's kind of maybe a little scary or a little concerning? And the other thing is looking at, okay, so let's say it's a bedwetting, right? We have a little child who started the bedwetting. Okay, so this is something new. It's not something that's happened before. Are there extra stresses going on in life? Okay, we're going to recognize. So if it's divorce, there's that. We have the pandemic going on. And is there, maybe they used to have a good connection with a grandparent that they're not able to see anymore because of, the whole quarantining and things like that. And is that a relationship that they've lost, that they're sad about? Or is there something potentially physical, right? So there could be that potential of having some type of UTI or having
Mhm.
some type of kidney issue going on. So there's always, we want to make sure that we're looking at all those components, right? And
Mhm.
as a counselor, that's one of the biggest things that I've found, is really looking at those physical components as well, to
Mhm.
make sure that that's not something that can be easily taken care of. Because even if it is a physical component, that's going to add stress to that child.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
taking a look at the whole child and not just the little bits and pieces.
Okay. So it's a lot of detective work.
Yes.
And
And
then
as
if
a counselor, that's exactly what I do too, right? Like I help the person discover themselves.
yeah. Yeah. And if they are just experiencing regression, let's say a kiddo wants to start sleeping in mom and dad's bed. I see
Hmm.
this happen a lot with parents who are divorcing. They miss their kids. They're not around them all the time. Um, and their kids now want to sleep with them. What do you think about that? Is that a good strategy?
Yes and no, right?
Okay.
It's very dependent on the relationship with the child, first of all. Is that child wanting to do that out of fear?
Hmm.
So do we need to address the fear that's behind that?
Hmm.
Is it because they don't see that parent all the time? They just want to spend, if they get 2 nights a week with the parent, they want to spend as much time as possible?
Hmm.
No, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially in those transition phases, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are also establishing healthy patterns.
Yeah.
And so if it's a, hey, you know what, this is a new place, you're not comfortable in it yet. Okay, maybe we start off with, okay, you can sleep in the bed, but maybe next night, if you still want to need to sleep in the bed, you sleep at the foot of the bed. Or maybe you create a little bed on the floor next to them. So you can kind of gradually transition if need be.
Sure. Okay. So, it seems like with kids that age, it's fairly simple. It's more about meeting their physical needs and their emotional needs at the time. And you're not really looking at like, when do I need to get these kids in counseling? Is there ever a time where you would look at a 4 or 5 year old and be like, hey, they need counseling?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what would that
Yes.
look like?
So especially anytime that there's high conflict, anytime that there's been potential for abuse or neglect, and all those things can actually be a part of a divorce very easily. Anytime that those things are involved, we definitely want to make sure that we're seeking that counseling support. Another time that you want to do that, I'm always a proponent. Anytime there's a divorce or any other type of major life change, I am always a proponent of doing counseling for families, for kids. And a big element behind that is the fact that normally, in a situation when everyone is kind of living with their normal life stresses and they don't have any of these major life stresses going on, right? We can kind of get through those moments day to day, take them one day at a time. As a parent, we manage our stress, we help manage our kids' stress. But what happens when we have these big life changes, especially when the parents are involved in those big life changes, we're having to deal with our own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then to be able to deal with our own stuff, that doesn't necessarily lead us to have enough energy, effort, ability to help manage our child efficiently.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why self-care is such a huge piece on the parent side, allowing the child and teaching the child self-care as well. But in those elements, when you don't have enough for yourself,
Hmm.
then you definitely aren't going to have enough to help support your child.
Hmm.
And so anytime when when you're feeling stressed by life situations, don't own your child's stress. Let someone else help with that. Right?
That's a
Let someone
great
else help
tip.
with that.
It's a great tip, because parents who are going through a divorce already have so much they're dealing with.
Right.
And of course, they want to support their children, but getting help for that does seem like just a great extra resource that cannot hurt.
Exactly. And I don't say that just because I'm a counselor.
Yeah,
Right? Like
no, I, I,
I'm not
I
trying to drum up business for myself, but
believe
I have plenty right now.
it.
But just as a general rule, I mean, and it's not just with divorce, like I said, I spent a lot of years doing grief and loss and the bereavement with, death and things like that.
Yeah.
And divorce is very, very similar to a death.
Hmm.
In fact, some ways it's even more complicated.
Hmm.
In a lot of ways, it's more complicated,
Hmm.
right? But the same components are in both of those. And so being able to have that background has really helped me be able to see what a lot of these kids are going through that people don't necessarily recognize, right?
Yeah.
That loss component is a huge, huge piece.
Yeah.
And so if you've ever lost someone that was important to you, or through death, that's one that a lot of people can kind of connect with, because most of us have lost someone,
Hmm.
especially with this pandemic going on, right? And the scariness that comes along with that.
Hmm.
Um, Whenever we lose someone, there's a lot of big things that we go through, even though for the most part, a death is a lot of times natural, right? It's a
Right.
lot of times it's an expected thing,
Right.
right? I know my most recent loss would have been my grandma, and that was a few years ago.
Hmm.
And I know you've had losses recently too.
Hmm.
And those are ones that they're expected. They're in their 70s, 80s, 90s,
Hmm.
right? But they still have a big emotional turmoil on us.
Hmm.
They have that impact on us. Um, you take that, now you add that divorce component where it's someone choosing to leave, right? It's not necessarily something that's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And that gets real complicated. That gets real
Absolutely.
complicated.
So, what does it usually look like in school aged children? How do we recognize that they're really struggling?
So school age kids are one of my favorite groups to work with. They are the ones who they pretty much will share how they feel. They're just starting to understand, right? They're just starting to understand that they have feelings, because feelings are a little abstract in the terms
Oh.
of not concrete, like not black and white, right? And so they're just starting to understand and have language for their feelings, but they're not necessarily shy to feel, to feel and to share those things. And so they're fun to work with in that sense. But you might see the same thing with the irritability, crankiness, whininess, clinginess. A lot of those same things you might see with toddlers. It just looks a little different when the kids are able to care for themselves a little bit, when they're
Hmm.
not quite as dependent as they would be with, as a toddler.
Hmm.
But you might also see one of the things that a lot of people overlook, actually, and this is something that I try to remind all my parents, is that just because a kid's not misbehaving doesn't mean they're not struggling, right? In fact, the kids who are misbehaving are oftentimes the kids who are having their needs met,
Yeah.
right? Misbehavior is a communication,
Yeah.
and they're communicating that they're struggling.
Yeah.
And we recognize that they're being naughty. They're picking on, fights with their siblings. They're, being naughty at school, those types of things. Their grades are going down, right? Those are things that we all recognize as, oh, that child needs help.
Right.
But the reverse of that, you have a kiddo who is now getting straight A's, who is can't miss a day of school, who, is has to get all their homework done no matter what the cost, right? Especially when you're looking at this school age child, up to about 11, 12 years old. We know that their homework is not, in the life scheme of things, that important, right? Like, when we get to high school, we're talking about getting into college, and that changes things a little bit in perspective. But when you're in that school age group and you have kids that are super stressed about that,
Hmm.
who have to get good grades, well, that's something that we also want to look at, right? Especially if that's a difference from what it was. And that's why it's important to know your kids, because I work with kids oftentimes who they have to, well, if I get straight A's, then so and so will love me.
Oh.
if I had just been better, they wouldn't have left. So I'm going to be better so that this other parent doesn't leave, or so that they won't leave me again,
Yeah.
or whatever the situation might be, right? Kids get deep. They can get real
Yeah.
deep,
Mhm.
right? And so that's one thing I like to always point out for sure, is that we oftentimes recognize the kids who are struggling because of bad behaviors. We
Mhm.
don't always recognize the kids that are struggling with good behaviors.
Mhm.
We almost think like, oh, phew, they're doing fine.
Right.
But if we don't know our child, that's where we'll stay. But if we can get to know them better, then we can recognize that as maybe this is something a little bit more than they're doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so I could be totally wrong on this, but it seems like the kids who are the perfectionists who take the problems on themselves, is it true that they seem to be the ones that might be more prone to self-harm?
They can be. They can be. Um, it can go either way really with self-harm, because you can have the kids who are, going down the depression route and feeling, and not that someone who is perfectionist can also go with the depressive route, but they tend to be more maybe on the anxiety driven kind of
Right.
internalizing piece.
Mhm.
But you can also have someone who has depression who goes that route, right? Like when we get to the self-harm as far as like cutting and things like that, it tends to be, I want to feel something because I zone out everything because everything else is too much. So I'm going to feel nothing except
Mhm.
for this,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Or I can't allow myself to feel this, so I'm going to feel something instead.
sure.
And so it can go, but that is one of those places that you might see some of the either super stringent, like they beat themselves up if they get to that perfectionist state, right? But it's always something you want to look out for, is those self-harm behaviors or thoughts, or little phrases, quips here and there, because it's definitely, especially when you have these big life transitions and you're getting into that hormonal changing period towards
Yes.
the end of that school age, it's
Mhm.
definitely something to have your eyes out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. I've got one family that has a kiddo who's struggling with pulling out her hair.
Trichotillomania.
I I I don't even know what that word is, but like
Yeah.
she's an anxious perfectionist child
Hmm.
and it's just it can manifest. Kids are so complicated and their problems
Hmm.
can manifest in so many ways and I didn't even know that pulling out your hair was a thing.
Yeah, that is so the diagnosis for that, generally speaking, is trichotillomania, right? That's one of the favorite ones everyone learns in grad school. Trichotillomania, right? Basically that's exactly what it is. It's pulling out hair. And it can be eyebrows, eyelashes, it can be hair on the head, especially so if you have a kid who has a nervous tendency generally to kind of play with their hair,
Sure.
someone who under stress might go to where it's more of a pulling of the hair, right? Pulling out hair. And you might, like, I've had clients who've had literal patches of being bald because they pull so much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's for sure one of those signs that their anxiety is way out of control and not
Sure.
managed well.
Um, okay. All right. So what about teens and preteens and do we treat later teens differently than younger teens or is that all about the same?
It's very similar. The biggest component that changes is just developmentally where they're at, as far as ability to kind of connect with their own emotions, kind of understand what's going on. Um, so early teens, they're just starting to understand language really well, right? They're just starting to understand that, hey, I can actually talk about what I'm feeling and have people kind of understand it. So they're going to start, telling you little bits here and there, and you have to be watching out for it, right? You got to hear for those moments.
Mhm.
The older teens, they're going to understand the situation a little bit better. And once you get to the older kids, you might also have them understanding that, hey, I can kind of manipulate the situation to my own, right, to work out in my behalf. Or it might be that they really have so much on their plate that they kind of disengage from everything, right? You can kind of have it go both ways. Kids go both ways. But overall, what the signs you're going to see are very similar between a preteen and a teen.
Mhm.
Um, Again, irritability,
Mhm.
right? That's the big one. Anger, a lot of times when you hit kind of the 12, 13, 14, that's when you're really going to see anger starting being geared towards somebody
Mm.
rather than just in general
Okay.
being kind of cranky. So you might have anger at the parent who's left. You might have anger at both parents,
Mm,
right? That can be definitely geared towards somebody or at both parents. So anger is a big one. You might have a lot of isolation. That's a big thing to watch out for. Whether they're isolating from family, right? Kind of doing that. I'm in my room, I'm not talking to anybody, or it might be just separation from family, because during this age group, individualization is a huge component of becoming a teen, right? Identifying yourself separate from your parents. And so that's why you see them kind of clamp onto their peers a
mhm,
lot more during this time, because they're differentiating from their parents. And so you might see them kind of go to their peers and share with their peers things that they might not necessarily share with you.
mm.
So a big component in this is, again, knowing your teen, knowing what this change is going through. And that's one of the hardest parts with when this transition happens during the teen years, is because how much of this is because they're a teen and how much of this because it's a divorce, right? Or
Right,
because it's added stress.
right.
So I can tell you, I have a 12-year-old son, and he is so hormonal. It's crazy. It's driving me nuts. And my husband and I are having, as far as I'm aware, no major issues, no major concerns, right? Things are pretty okay for us. Um, but there are times, I tell you what, there's times when I just have to shake my head and like try not to pull out my own hair, because I just have to breathe.
Yeah,
Right? I just have to breathe. And he is having his normal hormonal, just teenage self.
yeah,
And so when you add that component of all those other pieces to it, the additional stresses, it can be really hard to know, is this or is it that? But the thing is it doesn't really matter. You're
yeah,
going to treat it either way.
yeah. The other really massive thing that I've noticed with my teenage boys is with moving school to online,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of screen time that they're getting went way up. And
Oh, yeah.
the amount of social interaction that they're getting actually with their peers and the amount of exercise,
Oh, yeah.
like and it's hit them hard, especially my 13-year-old. And I feel like, maybe it's also due to hormones and moodiness, but like, but I also see just how easily, and how, I don't know how do you know if your child is addicted to electronics?
Shut it off and see what happens.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I can tell you when I shut it off, like I mean, they're not happy.
Right. Right. Well, and I would say that probably, I mean, and this is just me throwing out a number, there's no research behind this number I'm about to give you, right? From my personal experience, I would say at least 80% of kids these days are addicted to
Mhm,
screens.
mhm.
There's very rarely do I have a kid come in my office who doesn't have a phone with them.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we're talking even like 6 and 7-year-olds have phones with
Wow.
them.
Well,
That is insane to me.
mhm,
But I don't parent the parents unless I
right.
need to give. I guide them,
Mhm,
but I don't parent the parents.
mhm,
Um, but there's always that screen, and so there is an addictive component 100% with
mhm, mhm.
screen time.
Yeah.
And so that's one of those things, if you shut off the screen and they freak out, well, that tells us that they probably have a little bit of addiction to it.
Yeah.
Maybe not to the sense that they're, like truly true addiction, but they're gearing that direction. And so, yeah, absolutely, especially with online school is insane. I cannot tell you, we're actually in school. Our schools have been in session
Mhm,
since the beginning of the school year. Thank
mhm.
heavens. We got quarantined for 2 weeks and I about died.
Yeah.
I mean, it was rough. It
Yeah.
was rough.
Yeah,
So
and another thing I've read that's made it a little hard for me, and I think for a lot of parents, is if children are only getting social interaction with peers on online platforms, then the choices that we make about what online platforms they can use will dictate the amount of access they can have to their friends.
yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
certain groups of friends use Snapchat. My kids don't have Snapchat.
right.
They
And
ask,
don't let them.
I know, right? Snapchat, no, but they did ask for something called Discord, and all of their friends have
Yeah.
chats on Discord, and I mean, they're very happy that they get to talk to their friends on Discord, and
So
so
like how do you limit that without limiting their social interactions in this crazy setting, right?
right, how do you balance the fact that like I think it's very important for them to be able to get social input with peers, not just their
Absolutely.
family. But if that has to
Absolutely.
happen all online, how do you manage the detrimental effects of them being online?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that I'm still trying to figure out, especially so I can tell you with this whole craziness that has happened with pandemic and whatnot, for a time period, I had to go with my practice being 100% online. For it was it 2 months? I think it was about 2 months. And I mean, I loved it in some ways because, I could jammy it from the waist down and it
Yeah.
was great.
Yes.
But at the same time, it was a lot, like just for my eyes. Like my eyes, I didn't have to use glasses 24/7. Now I do because I'm constantly on a screen, right?
Right.
And I was getting headaches and I felt like I just needed like give me light. So
Mhm.
one of the things that I have done is I got myself a happy light. I don't know if you can see the bright light kind of
Mhm.
shining up here.
Yeah.
It's the full spectrum light. So I turn it on when I'm working on the computer because it gets you that full spectrum input that we don't get if we're not going outside. Now
Yeah.
the other component is I'm up north, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm in Montana. In the wintertime, we don't get a lot of light.
Yeah.
And so we have to have that added component as well. So you being down in Arizona, it's a little bit easier to get a little more sunlight than we
Yeah.
get. But still, you're still not, you're still your guys' winter. You're still not outside like you would be at other times,
Right.
right? So you're still not getting that full input. So having good light come in. The other key component to this is with screen time. What I found is making sure you have a very specific cutoff time for screen
Mhm.
time for kids, because it's great that they want to talk to their friends, but after a certain time, you got to get ready for bed. You got to do the
Right.
bedtime routine,
Mhm.
right? And in order to help support that sleeping hygiene, which is what we call the getting ready for bed piece, that sleep hygiene, we want to make sure that the screen's off for at least a half hour before bedtime.
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, our bodies are built on light and dark cycles, right?
Mhm.
We are awake. We're meant to be awake in the daytime. We're meant to be asleep, and our body repairing itself at the nighttime. So we get triggered off of day and night with the light.
Mhm.
And so if you've ever driven by a house in the evening and they had a TV running, right? Even though you can't see the TV, you know there's a TV going. And why is that? Because you can see those flashing lights, right? When we're watching, we don't necessarily see the flashing of the lights, but it's happening. And so as we're sitting there in the dark watching these screens, we're getting that constant trigger of, hey, you're supposed to be awake. By the way, don't forget you're supposed to be awake right now,
Yeah.
right? And so it really can throw off that sleep cycle, that good sleep hygiene. And
Mhm.
so having that screen time off of at least a half hour, preferably like an hour, but if you're struggling with that, at least a half hour
Mhm.
before it's bedtime,
Mhm.
to kind of shut that down, stop sending that signal to your brain that it's time to be awake.
Mhm.
You're going to get better sleep, better quality sleep. You'll probably be able to fall asleep faster.
Mhm.
And it's going to help reduce some of that screen time that we're talking about, right? Because I don't know if my kids will like hide their tablets
Mhm.
in their room. I'm like, yeah, guess what? I'll just turn off the internet. We'll just make this real easy,
Yeah,
right?
it's hard. Like they got everybody got a Chromebook from school, and
Mhm.
so my kids, the teenagers, have iPhones which have time limits on them, but the
Mhm.
Chromebooks, I don't control it. I can't put a time limit on them. It's just hard these days to
Right.
put restrictions in place that really work.
Right. That's why I said if you have to just unplug the internet or change the password, you do that. I mean, you
Yeah.
can you got to get creative as a parent, and that's the same thing with working with all of these different things is we have to just get creative,
Mhm.
right? And that's why one of the reasons why going to a counselor or seeking additional help, because we have different experiences that can give you some insights into, oh, maybe try this piece,
Sure.
right?
Yes.
Maybe try that piece, and that can be really helpful.
Mhm. Okay, couple more questions. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but this has been really great.
Oh,
So,
no problem.
what I want to know a couple things. Number one, how can we approach the concept of therapy with an angry teenager who hates our guts anyway?
Mhm.
And how can we approach the concept of counseling for our children with a co parent if there's a high conflict relationship? So you can tackle
Right.
those however you want.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the parent first,
Okay.
right? So with the parent, if it's high conflict, chances are you guys just don't get along and you're
Mhm.
not, and sometimes you fight because you can, not because there's a purpose to it,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, power
Um,
struggles.
and so first of all, you have to ask the question of do I believe that that the other parent, the co-parent, do I believe that they have the best interest at heart for the child? Right? Sometimes you're going to say yes, sometimes you're going to say no. If
Mm,
you say no, they don't, well, then maybe the first thing you have to do is say, yeah, you have to look at, okay, can I accept the fact that they have a different opinion on this?
mm-hmm.
And what does the parenting plan say? You know, that's something we have to go and look at as well, right? Ideally, we're going to have their buy-in and that it's going to work to be able to get that support. But ultimately, if you have the legal authority to take your child to counseling and you feel that it's very important to do so, and the other person, just for whatever reason, won't agree to it, you do what's going to be best for your child, right?
I love that you said that because I agree. And I agree as a mom and I agree as an attorney. Like, if, because sometimes your parenting plan says you must get permission, and other times your parenting plan says you must communicate and give notice. And
Mhm.
that might mean you choose to give notice and take your children to therapy on your parenting time.
Yes.
And as long as you're communicating, you may not be violating your court order. Although it can't, sometimes it's really hard to find a counselor who's willing to see your child if you have joint custody and not both parents sign off.
Mhm. So, and that, I mean, that's definitely a personal preference for the counselor. You know,
Okay.
every counselor is going to have their own reasons. You know, as a counselor, I want to do everything in my possible power to stay away from the court,
Right.
right? Like, I want to stay away from court all that I can.
Mhm.
That being said, I also, if I have a parent who wants to do counseling
Mhm.
and they have the right to do so, legal right to do so, from what I can understand, right? And
Mhm.
that's what they present. Um, I would have them sign my paperwork,
Mhm.
right, that says that they have the authority to do this.
Mhm.
And then I would leave it to them,
Mhm.
right, to make that choice. Um, if they don't have the legal authority to do that, then that's still going to be on them
I
to,
love that you take that approach. I do.
yeah.
I do. I hate it when counselors or schools or whomever decides that they're going to become legal interpretationists. So I love that that is your position.
Yeah, well, because I know that now I haven't been through my own divorce, right? But you know my experience and what I have gone through with family and friends and whatnot. Um, and I know that there is no way in my experiences with those things that the other party would agree to anything, regardless of if it was the best thing possible for the child, right? it
Mhm.
was it was because they despised the parent more than they loved the child in that moment.
Mhm.
And for me as a counselor, I don't care what the relationship is between the parents. I mean, I do because it's affecting the child, but if they want to fight and not do what's best for the child, they can fight. I want to do what's best for the child. And what's best for the child is getting that help and support. Like I said, I want to cover my basis as well, right? Like, I don't want to be sued.
Right.
But also, if I've done what I can on my part as a counselor to make sure that my basis is covered and that you've said that you have the legal authority to sign for this child,
Mhm.
then you're the one who's holding that, not me.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's fantastic insight. And then what do we do with angry teens who hate us and don't want to go to counseling? If
So
mom,
angry teens who hate us and don't want to go to counseling. It's a fun one. This is a fun one as a counselor to receive the angry teen who doesn't want to go to counseling. It's a tough situation, right? I actually think in a lot of ways it's harder than it is with the high conflict
mm,
parent. And the reason I say that is because, like I said, as long as you're legally allowed to do it, make that choice, right? But with a teen, they have the right to not participate, right? Even if you literally drag them in there, they can sit there and say not a single word. I have had that. It is difficult. That being said, the more open and honest you can be with a teenager, because they are, again, developmentally, hopefully you know your child well enough to know where they're at in the terms of what they can understand and accept about the situation, right? Um, but the more that you can be open and honest with them and just say, hey, you know, this is what I'm seeing. Have concrete details, right? Even though teens are moving out of the concrete, when we get emotionally triggered, which these teens are, right? When we get emotionally triggered, this part of our brain, this back part of the brain, is the one that's running the show. Right. This part up here, this is our executive functioning. This is our rational mind. This is the mind that says, don't do that.
mhm.
Right. this one gets real quiet.
Mhm.
It's not able to be heard over this back emotional brain, right? And
Mhm.
so when we're trying to when we're trying to use logic in terms of, yeah, but this will be so much better and you get to talk to somebody, this part of the brain is like not even hearing it, right? This part of the brain is the part that would process that, and this is the part that's in charge right now. And
Mhm.
so when that part gets going, and you've seen a toddler, right? Toddlers who throw tantrums, that's all back here,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's not their little logic mind trying to process it. That's just emotion. I want it, I didn't get it, I'm throwing a fit, I'm tired, cranky, whatever it is, right? um, when we get to that emotional state, we all function just like toddlers. It may look slightly different, but we all function just like toddlers. And so coming back to that concrete level, and helping manage that emotional part of it. And once the emotions are managed a little bit better, then tackling that, let's figure things out. That can help. Going, like I said, to the concrete of, here's the things I've seen, right? I've seen that you are, throwing stuff around. I've seen that you and your siblings have been fighting. I've seen that have started staying out late past curfew. I've seen that I found drug paraphernalia, whether you're using it or a friend's using it. I've found it, right? And that scares me. Using those concrete details is a good way to talk to them about it. And owning your relationship with the teen, right? Owning that they have a relationship with their other parent, whether that's good, bad, or the other. And saying, I really want to make sure that you have the support that you need. I know that I probably haven't been here, and chances are your team may or may not have said, you're not listening to me.
Mm,
You don't hear what I have to say. And you might
mm.
be like, I'm totally listening to you. Well, if they're telling you that you're not listening, you're not listening, right? That means they're feeling like their feelings aren't valid. Their experience isn't what they're experiencing. And so a big piece is going to be hearing what they have to say, acknowledging it, and taking out the judgment.
Sure.
That's hard because
Yeah.
of the parent, right? We're constantly trying to make sure, are we doing the right thing, not doing the right thing? But when it comes to talking to the teens, especially when they're highly emotional, we want to make sure that they feel like their emotions are actually being heard,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't know if you've ever seen that video. It's not about the nail. It's a funny little video about a woman talking to her husband, boyfriend, whomever, trying to relay her emotional experience of something. And he's like, yeah, but if you just did this, it would be better. If you just did this, it would be better. And in the long run, once he acknowledges how she feels about that thing, she's
Right.
like, exactly. That's what it is. He's validating her feelings and her experience, not what he actually sees.
Right. Right.
Right.
And I think what can be so hard about what you're suggesting is it might feel like our teens are asking us to condone their bad behavior, and it can be very hard to listen to their perception when we think it's wrong.
Right. Absolutely.
And that somehow by
Absolutely.
feeding into their perception, we're feeding into their idea that they're justified in their bad behavior or whatever. So, how are we supposed to handle that?
Well, and that's exactly it. And that's that piece where it comes in, is to hearing what they're saying, hearing what they're actually saying. So if they say, well, I don't care, I want to hang out with my friends, right? What they're actually saying is that they are getting something from spending time with their friends that they are not getting with spending time with you, right? So rather than saying, you're always with your friends,
Sure.
right? You go with, so tell me what you like about spending time with your friends. Tell me why you want to spend more time with your friends. Hearing what they have to say about that. Maybe it's like, because they don't pester me all the time to clean my room. They don't bug me about getting my homework done. Whatever it might be, right? Well, then you kind of play on what they say. Okay, so you're saying that those things. Is there a way that we can bring that at the house? Because it's really important to me that you and I have a strong relationship, and I feel like our relationship isn't as strong as it used to be, right? And I want to build that relationship. How can we do that? Right. So rather than saying, no, you're making these choices, you're staying out past curfew, you're breaking all these, right? Rather than going that route, that's where the judgment piece, you're judging whether they are making the right choice or wrong choice.
Sure.
Right. And if you have a healthy relationship with your teenager, and they're managing their stress well, then that's okay to be more direct with that, and to share some of those things of, you know what, you made this choice, that's breaking the rule. Right. But if you have a teenager who is feeling like they're not being validated and not being heard, when you say those things, it's just going to add that on there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So one of the phrases that I use with all of my parents, and I use this with couples as well, right, is the phrase connect to correct. If you ever want to correct or change a behavior of any kind, or the way someone's interacting, you have to connect with them first. Because if you go straight to the correcting piece, those defenses are coming up. And as soon as those defenses come from this emotional brain back here that says things aren't safe and I need to protect myself, not from this logical, let's make changes place, right? So as we focus on that connecting piece, and that's where the validating what their experience is and their feelings of things, as we connect with them, those defenses slowly come down,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that connect piece first. And then once you've connected with them and it becomes a safe place, that's when you bring in that correction piece of, you're making these choices and staying out
Mm-hmm.
past curfew.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've set these rules. These rules haven't really changed from what they used to be.
Right.
Do you understand why we have those rules in place? Why do you think that they're important to me? Because for some kids, I'm like, am I wearing the shirt? So one of the shirt that we had matching pajamas for Christmas, right? And each one of us in the family had their own little phrase. And dad's was, go ask, I'm the dad, go ask mom, right? Mine was, I'm the mom because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we get into that because I said so,
Yeah.
right? And we don't actually have a real good reason
Yeah.
behind it other than I just said so.
Right.
Well, and I don't tell my kids this, but parents don't necessarily have good reasons for the reasons they have say no,
Not
or
all.
they say yes, or whatever it is, right? Sometimes it's because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't fly with a teen who is struggling. Because I said so, that's an emotional response from us that we're stressed and we don't have time to process this. And I don't know why I said that, but I said it.
Rachel, I completely agree with you. 1,000%. That totally works for me. But I have got clients who really value respect, and
Mm-hmm.
they really are highly opposed to allowing their teenager to disrespect them. And when you're in a co-parenting relationship,
Mm-hmm.
that dynamic can literally cause breakdowns that parents and kids don't recover from.
Yeah.
So what can I say and what can you say to those parents that want their household to run a certain way and want their children to be respectful, and their relationship is not good right now,
Mm-hmm.
and they're unwilling to tolerate bad behavior on behalf of their teen? What can they do?
So go to counseling. Right? That's a great family counseling area. So I'll definitely put that out there. But on top of that, another big question is, why is respect so important to you? What does
Mm,
respect mean?
mm,
Right? Is to challenge that, not challenge in terms of saying that they're wrong, but challenge in terms of saying, really understand what this actually means to you. Because a lot of times when they say, because I have all the time parents that say they're disrespectful,
yes.
right? All the time.
Mhm.
And I get that. I've had those feelings.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like
Kids are disrespectful.
they are disrespectful, right? But what does respect mean to me, right? And what does that respect mean to that parent? If they're not being respected, does that mean they're not being loved?
Mm,
If they're not respected, does that mean that the parent has no authority? And if
mhm,
they have no authority, what does that mean?
mhm.
There's a lot of different, especially considering the people's family histories coming up to the point where they're at. There's a lot of different layers that can be there and what that means to them. For some people, it was in my household, if I didn't respect my dad, then I got beat. And I'm not beating my child. So we're a step up. Well, you know what? Good. Yeah, you are. And I will give you props for that. 100%. I will give you
Yay.
props that you have made improvements. But do you think we can make some more improvements? You're
Sure.
aware of those changes. We want to celebrate the changes you've made, but I think that you have it in you to make even better, to
Mhm.
do even better, to choose even better.
So really challenging and deconstructing that value to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they're not willing to do that, I mean, people get stuck. They do. People do get stuck. And until they want to make a change, they won't. There's nothing that we can do to change someone else's mind, to change how someone else feels. We can't change anybody else, right? Which is a huge piece coming into when you look at a divorce situation, right? Like, honestly, that's probably why most divorces happen,
Yeah.
right? Because two parties, for whatever reason, are not willing to change, both make changes.
Right.
But once that separation has changed, I think sometimes people think that there's this magical thing that's going to happen, that now that person's going to start making changes and agree with me.
Yeah. Right.
Probably not,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you have that 50-50 parenting or whatever that looks like, one of the biggest challenges that kids have is transitioning between the two pieces, right? And just and creating, going back to that stress management piece, you can imagine going from one situation to a next situation back and forth. That transition can be super stressful.
Yeah.
Super, super stressful, because very rarely do parents who are in a healthy relationship have identical parenting styles.
Right.
So if you have parents who are in an unhealthy relationship that most likely ends in divorce, chances are even less that they're going to have the same parenting style.
Right.
And so you have kids that are trying to navigate between this type and this type. Like, this parent is an authoritarian. This parent is so lackadaisical because they're overcompensating that right, like that they have no structure over here.
Right.
Right. And so having kids trying to figure out how to transition between the two, sometimes they mess up.
Right.
Sometimes the kids mess up. I use that in loose terms, mess up. But sometimes they don't necessarily navigate that transition very well and very smoothly. So one of the things I encourage to help manage with some of that is to create rituals or structure in place for that transition. So, like, if you go from an authoritarian place to a little more relaxed atmosphere, you can go, you can tell that child when they come to the house, okay, we're going to give you 10 minutes to just relax, to veg. If you want to put things in order, you can here. If you want to sit in your room and do nothing for the next 2 minutes, feel free. This is your time to kind of transition. And maybe kids need a little more time. Maybe some kids need a half hour, right?
Sure.
But some kids might need 5 minutes. Some kids might be fine.
Right.
But really setting a very specific time for them to say, hey, during this transition, we're gonna, we're gonna allow you to have that minute to kind of just say, oh yeah, oh, I'm here. Here's the rules over at this house. Here's the rules
Right.
over at, right. They
Mm-hmm.
have to figure it out and navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And so allowing them, it's kind of like if you think about when we get home from work, right? What's the first thing we want to do? Kick off our shoes, take off the work clothes, get in comfortable clothes,
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe hop on Facebook or the internet for, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, some days, whatever it might be, right? Like, you hop on. We have, as adults, we have our little veg time, our kind of decompression time. Kids need that same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so creating that as part of a ritual or a transition into each home can really help with that, making it a little bit more manageable, because then they can kind of say, okay, oh, I'm at mom's. Here's what we're going to do at mom's. Here's how things work here. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to take away all the struggles and stresses of that transition, but it can really help support it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a great tip. Okay, Rachel, I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but one of the questions I have is I know you're in Montana, but
Mhm.
can you work with clients anywhere, or do you really only work with local clients?
So the way that state laws work for counseling is we have to be licensed in the state where the client resides or where they're at the time that they are receiving counseling.
Okay.
So as of right now, I'm only licensed in Montana, so I can work with anyone who is in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
I do have telehealth still, right? So they don't have to be in my office to be able to
Mm-hmm.
work with them,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to be in Montana for me
Okay.
to work with them.
Okay.
Um, that being said, I am branching out and looking at other places to get licensed, just so I can maybe grow that piece a little bit more. But generally speaking, you have to have someone who is licensed in the state.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to put all of your contact information in the notes. Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. And I'll
Right.
send you a link. I actually found a great website that has how to talk to kids about divorce, and it's broken down by age and development and things like that. It does a really good job of just making it real simple and clear. So I'll send you that link. You can post that too.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Billy.
Bye.